So we asked you guys and gals to come today mostly because I've talked to almost all of you at different times, so things are kind of picking up. So we wanted to start giving you a regular time schedule so we could kind of focus both my time and the other directors and Aaron's time as we get closer to the actual flood fight. So what I wanted to do was just sort of give you a contextual setting here, and then I'll move to the podium and cover the other main points, if that's okay. Many of you are familiar with the National Weather Service hydrology site. If you go to the National Weather Service website, you'll see rivers and lakes on the top tab. You just click on that tab, and then you can click on any one of the many points in the National Weather Service area. So when you click on the Mississippi River at St. Paul, you'll get this graph. This was last observed at 1:15, and it'll also remind you that flood stage is at 14 feet. So the blue line represents actual conditions, and the dotted blue vertical line represents the time that you're at now. The green graphed line represents their expected forecast. And it's very important to note that every 24 hours this is updated for a 7-day period. So today being the 17th, it goes through March 24th. What this graph does not take into account is the precipitation beyond the next 24 hours. So this is based on literally current conditions at the time of the forecast. So every 24 hours they do a remodel based on the actual conditions. So as of 11:45 today, Mississippi River is at 10.4 feet. Just real quickly, I gave Chris McAuliffe the math lesson the other day. Flood stage in feet is how we want to communicate with the public, because engineers, our public works people, might use specific elevations that are of engineering quality and heights that we build to, but for the public we want to use the flood stage numbers. So normal river levels in St. Paul are about 3 to 4 feet, and 14 feet is considered flood stage. So when we're at 10.4 feet right now, we're 4 feet below flood stage. I'm not trying to insult anybody, I just want to make sure you have that context. At 17 feet flood stage, it's considered by the National Weather Service to be major flood stage. So shortly before noon today, about 11:15, the National Weather Service contacted us and told us that our expected forecast, which had been at 17 feet, is being raised to 18 feet, as you see here in this graph. The initial predictions had us reaching flood stage of 14 feet sometime Saturday morning. The current graph has us reaching that 7 o'clock on Friday morning. So moved it up 24 hours and actually increased the level. So that's sort of the reference regarding the map. Does that work for everybody? And then we'll just switch to the podium. So the Weather Service has informed us that the 14-foot flood stage would happen sometime on Friday, that we would be at 17 feet sometime by Sunday. Just for reference point, if we go to an 18 or 19 foot crest, that would put this 2010 into a top 10 event in the city of St. Paul. The flood of record is still the 1965 flood, and that was over 26 feet. And there's a mark down on the riverside that shows that level. Certainly don't expect anything of that nature for this year. At 17 feet, we see impacts begin to our Harriet Island Park along the river and Raspberry Island, and we close those different locations, as well as currently we're taking protective measures to protect them and redirect some of the water that might come. At about 18 feet, you'll see water at the crown of the road near Sibley and Warner as a reference point. So that's kind of where this is at. If it's 19.5 feet, you'll see water covering Sibley and Warner. So what have we done so far? Yesterday, Mayor Coleman declared a local emergency here in the city of St. Paul that allows us to implement certain parts of our emergency operations plan, directs departments to work in coordination with each other to the maximum extent, allows us to incur expenses for emergency protective measures, and it also allows us to apply for state and federal assistance under that particular emergency. The governor has declared a state of emergency in the state of Minnesota for about 28 counties, including Ramsey County. So we're glad that the governor was able to do that, and we're confident that President Obama will find that a presidential disaster declaration is warranted in those counties in Minnesota. Midnight tonight, our boat launches that are operated by the city will be closed, and the river will be closed to recreational boating. It's very dangerous conditions out there. We have a lot of ice. We have a lot of debris in the river. We're very concerned about anybody that's on or near the river. So we'll be closing those boat launches tonight at midnight. Hidden Falls Park and Lilydale Regional Park will also be closed as of midnight tonight, and we encourage the public to really stay away from those areas. There's really no reason to go down there. The water can be deceiving. It's extremely dangerous to be around the river. Thursday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, Water Street between the Smith Avenue Bridge and the Pool and Yacht Club in Lilydale will be closed to all traffic. Saturday morning, if the floodwaters continue with the projected forecast, we will be closing Shepherd, Warner Road at Sibley. The closure will actually happen back at Eagle Street to allow for traffic. All the way to Highway 61 because of the need to bring in heavy equipment to build a temporary emergency flood protection levee along the Sibley, Jackson, and Shepherd Road area. That construction process, if we have to undertake that, will begin on Monday. What's really important about this is we're watching this every single day, and we're in daily communication with the National Weather Service because we want to make sure that we take protective measures at the right time, but not too early. And if the crest forecasts change, we won't be taking as many aggressive measures. But the public needs to understand we are going to err on the side of caution and protection of the infrastructure in St. Paul. A couple of other things before we take questions is over the years you might think, well, why is it that St. Paul doesn't seem to have this heightened sense of urgency? Believe me, we have a sense of urgency. The Department of Emergency Management, the Department of Public Works, Parks and Recreation have all been focused on this for several weeks. But in St. Paul, we've done things over the past several years, 30 to 40 years even. We've moved houses out of the Lilydale area so we don't have those residences at risk. Our park system has reclaimed property and land, so they were built to take on water and be part of the floodplain. Metropolitan Airports Commission has built a flood wall since the 2001 floods, in fact. And in 2007, Mayor Coleman created a separate department, Department of Emergency Management, in order to make sure all those efforts are coordinated between city departments. So Mayor Coleman's been very serious about emergency preparedness. Our city and our historical posture has been to be serious about protection of the infrastructure of St. Paul. So that's pretty much all I have, and I'm happy to take questions. I may defer those to my colleagues who are probably better suited to answer the technical questions. But
just a question on the timeline. For Warner and Sibley Road, I think you said the crest there was 18 feet before it was gotten flooding.
we begin to see water on the road at 18 feet. Yeah.
And the barrier takes about 2 days to construct.
Correct.
So you're starting on Monday, I'm looking at the graphs and it looks like it might already hit 18 feet earlier than that. I mean, do you?
Good. That's a great question, Ted. That's our plan right now, based on the graph. However, remember the blue line is actual conditions, and we monitor that every single day, and we're in communication with the National Weather Service. So if they tell us, no, this thing is starting to become more accurate or it's moving up to a faster timeline, we're in a position to go ahead and initiate these things on an earlier basis. But as of right now, that's kind of our timeline. The other aspect of that is...
I can't really see, when is it expected to hit 18? I can't really see from...
That looks like Monday, midday Monday, about 1 o'clock Monday the 22nd. But what's important about that is the initial way that that's constructed is that they put the J barrier or the Jersey barriers out with bolstered in behind it, and then they use heavy equipment behind that Jersey barrier. So if water comes up upon that initial flood protection, that's okay. They're working behind that to build the larger flood protection. So again, I think the key points on that are that we're monitoring this every day and we're in a position to move forward quicker if we have to, as well as if these adjust downward, which would be a good thing, we're able to not have to incur those expenses and the disruption to traffic. So, and then the second one is that we take some initial actions that buy us some time so they can work behind that with the heavy equipment.
So 18 feet by mid-Monday, what does that mean for Harriet Island?
Maybe I'll turn that over to Mike as to, in terms of, you know, what happens at Harriet Island and sort of a good visual indicator of.
And Holman Field with the.
Sure. I can cover Holman Field while Mike's collecting his thoughts quick on Harriet Island. Holman Field, the flood wall is owned by the Metropolitan Airports Commission, so Pat Hogan can tell you all the details on that. But they tell us, and we're in coordination with them as well, that they're protected to 25.5 feet with the flood wall. They have impacts to their operations because they move in temporary flood walls, so they have to close 2 of the 3 airports because of length. But they're also prepared to go ahead at the certain time. And they don't want to do it too early as well, but at a certain time they will go ahead and initiate the temporary flood wall. But they'll still be able to remain open to some services, which is a huge thing because in 2001 they were closed for over 70 days. So a big economic impact. So Harriet Island.
Harriet Island and what these flood numbers look like at Harriet Island. First of all, again, as Director Larkin pointed out, we've made good decisions, and these parks are in the floodplain. We know they're going to flood. They're designed to flood. There's features there such as the docks being able to pivot, such as the location of the major infrastructure, circuit panels, water heaters are located at levels that can withstand these forecasted levels and much more than that. So we're situated with the big infrastructure to be able to deal with something like this. What the public will see as we prepare for these type of forecasts is right now we're putting in protective measures to try to deflect debris from buildings and channel the water a little bit. And the public will see at 17 feet that we'll close the island in terms of access. And if you're looking for a visual level, at 18 feet, we'll start getting water that would encroach toward the Wigington Pavilion or the Harriet Island Pavilion. So in terms of what the public will see, 17 feet closures to the island, including access to Raspberry Island, 18 feet water starting to encroach into the area around the Wigington Pavilion.
Would it get into the pavilion?
So you're taking the second option, because there were 2 options, one to build the wall along the shore, and the second to kind of put up those hockey boards and divert water through it. So you're doing the latter option.
The 2 questions. The first, will water go into the pavilion? If Harriet Island floods to these levels, we'd expect water into the pavilion. The facility is designed to accept the water. The second, in terms of what we're doing in terms of protection, last year, or the last flood situation, thank goodness not last year, the last flood situation, there was water on pretty much the entire Harriet Island. The water will percolate up through the storm sewers, and the water will matriculate through the barriers. So we're hoping to have the same effect with a little bit different approach.
Entirely underwater or just partially underwater? I'm just...
Speaking to the circumstance in 18 feet, the island will not entirely be underwater.
Gotcha. But parts of it would be.
But parts of it would
Okay.
be. And again, the water is going to matriculate to the areas the water is going to matriculate to. This is a floodplain. It's an area we expect to flood.
But just to be clear, you're not putting up the Jersey barriers along the shore or anything like that? That's
In terms of our flood response and the protections this year, we're not encircling the entire Great Lawn with Jersey barriers. We're putting them in more selective and strategic locations to protect the fixed assets.
What about the businesses that are around there?
Such as the paddle forward package companies or some
That
of
or
those.
even past, I guess where the levee is, or the dike?
Well, I'm not
Just south of Harriet Island.
quite sure which ones you're, oh, the kind of the commercial area. Actually, they're all behind on the opposite side of the protective levee, the permanent levee protection. Just clarification on what Mike had said about the Jersey barriers is it's really, and the expert here is operations manager Rich Larkin, but it's really more of a redirection and protection against the debris. We know that there's going to be water there, but we're trying to keep those large pieces of wood and those other kinds of debris that come down the river from impacting the structure. We'd rather redirect that downriver into the channel than have that come into a building, for instance. So that's really the protective measure of that Jersey barrier. Kind of leads me to a really important point that we hope you folks will help us with. I think in this kind of a situation, the public will be very interested to kind of see both what's happening with city staff or contracted workers putting in these temporary flood protection measures, as well as just kind of curious about seeing the river and what's happening. We really, really encourage folks not to go to those construction areas, not to go down to Harriet Island and walk on the levee and different things of that nature. We'd rather they enjoyed those views from our park up on Kellogg, and they got a great panoramic view of the river, and they're in a much safer environment overlooking the whole river rather than being down there with being at risk with construction work going on, or frankly, water is very dangerous in flood situations, so the best thing to do is observe it from far off.
Director Larkin, could you just recap on what your projections are? You moved them up a day and the flood levels. Could you go through that one more time, please?
Sure, that's no problem. Since about 1 o'clock this afternoon, we received word from the Weather Service that the 14-foot, which is flood stage in the city of St. Paul, would have happened close to 24 hours earlier than we originally projected, and that potentially major flood stage in St. Paul would also happen a day earlier. The good news about that is our staff have been working for several weeks to prepare contingencies, and it's really a matter of the actual conditions that are observed in our daily contact with the National Weather Service in terms of what we're really going to be doing at those different levels. So we're ready to move beforehand if we need to, if the projections move up again, and we're also ready to back off if the projections move down.
Are there any occupied buildings or businesses in any of these areas that get flooded first?
We do have several industrial areas along Childs Road. They are riverside operations, so they've been there for some time, and they pretty much expect and understand what the river will do. So they all have internal contingency plans to move materials and to protect their businesses from flooding as well. One of the things that we're doing in the Emergency Operations Center is we're making sure we have a private sector coordination position where we're providing them the information and making sure that the city is supporting their efforts at protecting their private property. So we've reached out to almost 95% of those businesses who experience those floods, and they've been there for a while, and they know the drill.
We don't have any plans at risk.
We have residential areas behind our permanent flood protection wall. But one of the, I think, really important things to note is that we have a extremely well-maintained, well-prepared system of permanent flood protection that protects the west side. So that's been in place for close to 30 years, and it's very well maintained by our public works staff. And matter of fact, that's what most of them are out there doing now, is making sure all the valves, all the gates, all the drains are operating properly, and there's no issues with the permanent flood wall.
So the condos and apartments on Shepherd Road there, all those new ones since the last major flooding, are they gonna be okay?
The upper landing area was built in 2006, and in that entire area, part of the zoning and planning process, they raised the level of the ground there by bringing in lots and lots of fill, knowing that they were within a flood zone. Public Works, as part of a reconstruction of the Shepherd Road, actually raised the level of Shepherd Road in that section as well. They are built to withstand 22 feet of flooding, so that would be on the order of a top 3 kind of event in St. Paul, and certainly well above these predictions. However, even at that level, they have special sewer systems and drainage systems that they're required to maintain and operate as a private entity, and the city has been in daily consultation with them, sharing the information about predictions and making sure that their systems are operational. So I think we've provided a lot of support for them, and they're really working hard to make sure their flood protection is in place and operational.
And you said that all the public boat landings in St. Paul are gonna be closed. Are you talking to Minneapolis and then the entities downriver where there's boat landings, are those closed as well? Or are you just trying to keep people off the river?
Well, what we do here in St. Paul is our Park and Recreation Department manages and operates those parks and those boat landings. So we coordinate with the Minnesota DNR, who's responsible for recreational boating. And then in terms of Minneapolis and other communities, we work through the State Emergency Operations Center, who has the Corps of Engineers right there with them, Minnesota DNR. All the state and federal agencies are part of the State Operations Center. So we're in contact directly with them.
And is that a crest? I mean, is that when it's expected to crest, or?
Well, Laura, I wish the crystal ball was functional. You know, we have to base it on actual conditions. It's a 7-day outlook. So right now, that looks to me like it's kind of flat. Flat is good too, but it's really too far out to say whether it's a crest or not. That's the hydrologists make those determinations kind of based on the actual conditions, and I think even they would say that 7 days out, it's really hard to tell. The thing about St. Paul is we're in terms of time below river, even though we're north. In terms of the river, we're downriver from all the activity that's happening on the Minnesota River. So everything that you've had in the news over the last several days, all that water needs to come through St. Paul to get to New Orleans. So that's why you're going to see the rise in St. Paul be a little bit later than where you've seen it happen in other places. So we hope that it maintains that flat, but we're ready to take actions if it continues to go up as well.
Cost?
The cost factor, you know, is something that we're very closely monitoring, again, on a daily basis. What we're doing right now is making sure that all of our costs are absorbed into existing operational budgets because of the financial situation that we all find ourselves in. The mayor has directed us to be very aware of those costs, but he's also directed that we will take the measures necessary to protect the public and the infrastructure. It's too early at this point to talk about what we've incurred to date, but as a reference, in 2001, the city received about $800,000 in federal and state assistance for the 2001 floods. But again, it's only a vague reference because we had a crest, 2 record crests actually, 2 weeks apart in April of 2001. So, you know, this situation, every flood is different, but it's something that we're monitoring. We just don't have.
That was the federal state assistance, you know what?
Generally, that covers about 75% of the costs under a presidential disaster declaration. But again, each of those is different as well.
Could you go through the Shepherd Warner closing again?
Actually, I might ask Bruce to do that because he's probably better qualified to cover that, and it's his daily work, so.
Hi, Bruce Beese, Public Works Director. What we are going to be doing is tomorrow we are going to be putting out signage at Warner and 61 and Shepherd and Chestnut, alerting the public that we will be closing Shepherd and Warner between those 2 points, 61 and Chestnut, Saturday morning. And what we're going to be doing then is we're going to be bringing in the Jersey barrier that Director Larkin talked about for both of those closures and for the potential likely construction of that dike at Jackson, Shepherd, Warner. And we're going to start doing that Saturday morning. And at the same time, we're going to be removing traffic signal controllers and traffic signals items in that area that are subject to damage from the water. So you'll see that happening on Saturday as well. And then, as you remarked earlier, we're going to be ready to move anytime between then and Monday on starting to construct that temporary levee down at Jackson and Warner.
So we don't know how long it'll be closed, or?
It takes 2 days to construct, just to construct it?
Well, let me take one question at a time. How long that stretch of roadway is closed is obviously related to that chart, and as Director Larkin mentioned, the duration of the event. And so we could be looking at a couple of weeks, likely. As Director Larkin said, our plans are flexible at this time so that we can act according to actual conditions. And then the second question again, please.
I guess that's not relevant. I was under the impression that once it was constructed, you might be reopening the road.
That's not correct. When we see water at about 18 feet, which is at the crown of the roadway, the center of the roadway at Jackson and Warner, then that roadway is going to need to be closed until the water goes back down. And after the water goes back down, of course, we need to get personnel in there to make sure all of the infrastructure is safe, and then clean it up, obviously, of any debris before we can remove that closure.
Thanks, everyone, for your
Thank you, folks.